Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining us today for this webinar on core web vitals and CMPs at Didomi. So at Didomi, we've been receiving a lot of questions from our customers and partners about the impact of CMPs on core web vitals over the last year, particularly so with recent developments on INP becoming a core web vital in 2024. And as we've been hard at work on optimizing our CMP, we thought it would be a good idea to organize this webinar and share our insights and best practices with you. I'm Jawad Stouli, CTO here at Didomi, where I manage our product and engineering team, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined today by Thierno Thiam from Google and by my colleagues from the product and engineering team at Didomi. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, this is Thierno. I'm a web ecosystem engineer at Google. I'm working for Chrome. Thank you for inviting me, Jawad.
Hi everyone, I'm Hernan Onzalo, engineering manager in charge of the SDKs team here at Didomi, and looking forward to presenting this topic.
Hello everyone, my name is Chappart and I'm the lead product manager for the CMP at Didomi.
And hello everyone, my name is Desirée Blank. I run product marketing at Didomi.
Thank you, everyone. I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank Thierno and the Google team for all their help and support today and throughout the last year. We've been working hard with them on optimizing the Didomi CMP for core web vitals. So thanks again for all the support there. We have about an hour together today, and here's roughly the agenda. So we'll start with a brief introduction from Thierno on core web vitals and why they're important. We will then discuss the impact of CMPs on core web vitals and the challenges that they present, as well as what's been Didomi's approach and roadmap to address those challenges. We will then share some practical best practices and tips to optimize the Didomi CMP in your website for core web vitals and INP more specifically. We'll do a pretty technical demo there and try to show how we approach these type of questions. And then we will end with a Q&A session where you can ask your questions to the panel. Feel free to ask your questions as we go in the chat or in the questions tab. During the presentation, we'll answer them either at the end or as we go. And additionally, we'll be also running a couple of polls throughout this webinar. So we'd love to get everybody's opinion as we go there. So we have a lot of content to cover today, so we'll get started right away. I will let Thierno take over the mic for an introduction to our core web vitals.
Thank you, Jawad. So let's start this presentation with a quick refresh about the core web vitals. So first of all, the Web Vitals is an initiative by Google to provide a unified guidance for quality signals for essentially delivering like a great user experience on the web. So the core web vitals is a subset of Web Vitals and currently consists of 3 metrics that are measuring the loading, the interactivity, and the visual stability of a website. These 3 metrics are the following one. So we have the LCP for the largest contentful paint, which is measuring how fast a website is loading the biggest content on the viewport. We have the interaction to next paint, which is INP. This metric measures how fast or how quickly a website is able to respond to every single like interaction in your website. And finally, we have the CLS for cumulative layout shift. This metric measures how a website overall like layout stability. Achieving a great score with these 3 metrics will ensure to have like smoother user experience on your website. For this presentation, we are going to focus on INP, and I will redirect you on web.dev, where you can see like all the information regarding the other metrics. If you don't know, INP for interaction to next paint is a metric or a core vital, if you want to say, that assesses a page responsiveness by just like observing all the interaction or the full duration of all interaction for the user for every single click, typing, and if you want keyboard interactions that occurs through the lifespan of a page. For us to ensure like you have like a great user experience, we would like or we recommend at least 75% of all the page views to at least or less 200 milliseconds of INP, and anything above like 500 milliseconds would be considered as like a poor user experience. Why did we create this new metric to replace FID? Well, we created this new metric as a better way for measuring like responsiveness. The overall goal of INP is to minimize the time from when a user initiates an interaction.
Yeah, I think we're having some issues hearing you, Thierno. I think you're cutting off.
Can you hear me? Hello? Jawad, can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you well, Thierno.
You can hear me, Hernan?
Yes.
Jawad, can you hear me? Can you check if others can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Thierno.
Okay. So let me continue then. So the thing that I was saying is like the overall goal of INP is to minimize the time from when a user initiates an interaction until the next frame is spent for almost all the user interactions that the user initiates. Like you can see here in this presentation on this slide, on this red rectangle. So the full duration of an interaction is started from when a user initiates it until the browser is ready to show the results of this information, of this interaction. That's actually the goal of INP. So as a business owner or a site owner, you might wonder like why you should care about this. That's a good question. Well, first of all, when you starting measuring or like improving INP, the good thing is like you will start like make your user experience better. That's the first thing. But potentially you could also like improve some business KPIs. So case studies has already proven like a strong relationship between INP and business metrics. For instance, the Economic Times, when they started improving INP, they saw like 50% decrease on bounce rate on their website, but also they saw like 43 of page views like uplift. We can take the case also about Trendyol, an e-commerce website in Turkish, when they improved INP by reducing INP up to 40%, they were able to see like 1% uplift on other CTR. So all these case studies are here actually like as an inspiration to help you to start taking action, working on these metrics. And I believe they will be like serving as inspiration to help you to start your journey with INP. So talking about journey on INP, the good thing is like you have to measure first. For all core vitals, before improving them, the first start is to measuring them. So let's deep dive with some tools that you can use quickly. If you are wondering to know like how your website is evolving or how your users are actually like experiencing your actual website, you can use our official data set called like Chrome User Report, CRUX. The Chrome User Experience Report is available, is a data set available via like a PageSpeed Insights website. And you can just type your website URL and you'll be able to see like your INP score. This website or this data set is like a good starting point when you want to see if you have good or need to improvement or bad INP. But the issue is that this data set will not give you like more accurate information. They will not give you like the root cause if you have like a bad INP. This is why we always suggest like to measure data in the field. Measuring data in the field will give you like more insights, more attribution. Where do you have like INP issues? Which was the element that the user interacted when they have like INP issues? So in order to do that, we always recommend our partners, we recommend developers to actually measure in the field your actual core vitals. This is why we recommend our official standard like library, webvital.js. This library actually help you to measure all the core vitals and especially also INP. So it exposes like a function called like on INP, and with this function you will have like you can pass like a callback With this callback, you will have like an object where you can see all the information regarding your INP. With this information, you can just like send them back to your server side and build like a dashboard to have like more information, more insight about what's happening in the field when your user are actually like browsing your website. This is just like an example of the standard build, but we have also another attribution build where actually when you use this version, you will have like more insight, like the target element that were hitting when the user interacts with the page, or even like all the script with the long animation frames. The natural next step after measuring INP would be like, okay, how I can improve INP. So let's talk about optimization. So believe it or not, but our recommendation is the following. If you want to optimize INP, the first thing that you have to do is just don't block the main thread. The environment where actually like your website is running is on the browser, and the browser is like a single threaded environment. So which means you have like only one road. So if all your tasks are taking like the entire world like to run after, the browser is really busy to actually do critical work. This is why we ask you, please don't block your main thread. Do the critical work as much as you can, but do them quickly. And if you end up having like, a busy like main thread, the next step that you could do is like to break your long task. Breaking long task means just like if you have like a lot of work, breaking them into a small chunk of tasks that you can defer later. And in order to do that, you can just like yield to the main thread. Yielding to the main thread is a technique that you can just use to actually let the browser respond quickly to critical work. And I think Hernan will spend some time to explain to you like later in this presentation how to do it. So to finish my presentation, I just want to tell you like we already have like a big collection of documentation that are available on web.dev. If you want to dig deeper about like how to start measuring INP from end to end and how to improve this metric. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jawad. I will be here at the end of this presentation to answer to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Thierno. Apologies for cutting you off there. I think the issue was on my side. Yeah, thanks a lot for that presentation. So now let's dive into the impact of CMPs on core web vitals. And we're going to try to help the audience understand what's the impact of CMPs on those vitals and what you should be looking at more specifically when thinking of those two things together. So CMPs are or have become a critical component of the web ecosystem, enabling publishers to collect and manage user consent for data processing and advertising purposes. However, what we also see is that CMPs can also have a significant impact on core web vitals, and it's important to understand how CMPs can affect the performance of your website. If we look at every vital independently, so if we start with LCP, largest contentful paint, the impact of CMPs there is going to be that they introduce additional JavaScript and CSS resources that need to be loaded before the main content of the page. And that can increase the time it takes for the largest element to be rendered and for the LCP to be registered. The CMP, if it's configured with a format that takes a significant amount of space on the page, like a full page dialog, for instance, at that point, the content notice itself becomes the element considered for the largest contentful page. And so CMPs will tend to impact LCPs in any case, but even more so if the format of content notice that you use is one of those dialogues versus a small banner. With the idea that if it's a full page dialog, then LCP is the CMP loading time to some extent. In terms of INP, the most common thing we see is that CMPs will run their own code as well as publishers' code for analytics, advertising, things like that, after interactions with the consent notice, which will increase the input latency. So the idea is that when there is a consent notice that is being shown and the user says yes or no, the CMP will be the source of running a lot of advertising and analytics code and third-party codes like that. And this can potentially be impacted and slow down your main thread, as Thierno mentioned. This is particularly true, obviously, on the first page load, when the user content needs to be collected. It's a lot less impactful on following page loads. And then in terms of CLS, generally CMPs, because they render on top of the page, whether it's a banner or a full page dialog, they'll tend to be above the rest of the content and not part of the regular layout of the page. CMPs, as a result, will generally not cause any layout shift, so they will not push elements around on the page and have limited to no impact on CLS. There could be exceptions, again, depending on how your CMP is implemented, but as a general rule, the CMP really doesn't impact CLS much. So the CMPs will impact LCP if the format is a full page dialog, and then INP, depending on how much code you're running, how many third parties you have on the page, things like that, INP will tend to be impacted as well. And then there are a couple of other metrics we'll look at Didomi when we work on performance. They're not core web vitals per se, but one is total blocking time, which is also a pretty standard metric you can find through Google's tools. And it measures for how long the main thread was blocked while computing generally the first page load or the page load itself, to the extent that the user experience is becomes poorer because of that, because the page becomes unresponsive to the user input. So we do look at total blocking time pretty extensively and apply the same measures, which is yielding and unblocking the main thread as much as possible. And then another metric we'll look at, particularly at Didomi, which is Didomi specific, so it's not necessarily a generic CMP metric, but that we call CMP ready time internally, which is the time it takes for the CMP to become ready on the page. Ready meaning that we have, if we need to show a consent notice, we have shown it, and we have shared the user status with all the third parties on the page. And so that metric is particularly important to us, and we publish it via the performance API, so you can collect it and track it through your standard web performance tools. So you can start monitoring that one as well from Didomi if you're interested in that. So as is very often the case when we talk about performance, there isn't a single and easy way of defining the impact of a CMP on the web performance of a website. As you can see, CMPs will impact different metrics in different ways and for different reasons. And the exact impact will vary based on the CMP configuration, the website itself, and the interactions between the two. And a bit later in this presentation, Hernan will go into how you can measure that and optimize your CMP configuration for the best performance possible. But keeping in mind that when you see a specific INP score, for instance, it's important to attribute correctly the source of that INP score so that you know what needs to be fixed. If it's a CMP issue, then go to your CMP, come to us, and we're happy to work with you on that. But very often, part of the performance is specific to the website itself or to other third parties. And by attributing that correctly, you're able to basically focus on the right thing to improve. So for now, I'll pass the mic to Julie, who will present Didomi's approach and work on optimizing the performance of our CMPs, CMP over the last year.
Thank you, Jawad. Hello again, everyone. So as Thierno was explaining a bit earlier, optimizing the web performance is quite crucial to ensure a good experience to the users navigating through your websites, which has an impact on business metrics. And at Didomi, this has been a topic we care about for a long time. What is very important to understand when it comes to performance is that optimization is an ongoing process. We experiment with new methods, we check their impact, and then we iterate until we achieve satisfactory results. And this is something we constantly monitor at Didomi based on client feedback and industry changes, such as the introduction of the INP metric as part of the Core Web Vitals, for example. So let's review the steps we have taken so far to improve our performance. The team has dedicated significant effort over the past year, and there have been several phases that you can see on this slide. First of all, in 2022, we collaborated with some clients to review the performance of our web SDK. The goal there was really to understand the key metrics our clients care about, determine our influence on these metrics, and identify the pain points. And this analysis led to a big improvement phase starting in early 2023. At this stage, the key metrics that were monitored were mainly the total blocking time and the CMP ready time that Jawad was just explaining a few minutes ago. And to enhance these metrics, we started to implement what we call the differential serving. We actually separated the deployment for older and more modern browsers, removing the elements that were designed for legacy browsers from the new ones. So this resulted in a more efficient SDK bundle that is loading faster and that offers better performance. We started after that to preload the UI module, ensuring that it is ready for use in advance, reducing the time during the initial notice display. And we also worked on some internal improvement, like replacing outdated libraries by new ones that are more performant, and also enabling a new compression type to have faster downloads for the SDK files. These all, as I was saying, these enhancements were made primarily to improve the TBT, speeding up also the notice and optimizing the SDK size. But following discussions that we had with Google last summer, we began on focusing on the INP as well, and we started to implement what Thierno was explaining as well, the yielding approach to improve this specific metric of INP. The yielding is basically splitting the SDK initialization process into smaller tasks, so other tasks can run earlier, and the main thread is not blocked for too long. We started to implement the yielding to basic actions like the agree to all and disagree to all last summer, and then we extended this approach to other actions like the X closing icon and also the continue without agreeing action April this year. And as we were not completely happy with the results, we pushed it further, and we recently implemented the yielding at a deeper level within the notice, including integrations, tag managers, and consent change callbacks. And this is what we call the yielding on consent feature that you might have heard about, as it was in a beta phase since a month, available through a dedicated flag. Through a dedicated flag that is called the performance yield on consent. So this new flag that we delivered in beta in June aims to significantly enhance the performance on interactive actions on the website. So you can offer a smoother and more responsive user experience. Our internal testing is pretty positive. It shows a 60 to 70% improvement in CMP related action. That being said, you might not see these exact improvements as Jawad was mentioning before, because INP is influenced by various factors on your website and is calculated over the page entire life cycle. But the feedback we received from beta testers has been positive, and we will conclude the beta phase this week and deploy the feature to all our clients in today's July 18th. As I stated earlier, the performance improvement is a long-term project, so we will keep following up on the topic during the year. For now, we'll wait a bit to see the impact of the last changes, and then we will continue to iterate based on observation and, of course, client feedback. So I take this opportunity to tell you that your input is very useful to us, so do not hesitate to contact us to share your feedback on how you perceive these improvements, what are your expectations, and any point you'd like to share. We are very happy to collaborate with you for this specific topic. So that was all for what we implemented. I'll now hand it over to Desirée.
All right, thank you, Julie. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the improvements, and this chart that you're seeing here. This is a publicly available report in Looker Studio. What it is it's looking at the, it's filtered on the % of origins having good INP for people using Didomi. So this data is compiled on a monthly time frame, so you'll see a bit of lagging updates, but you can see the impact of the improvements that we've made. It's really kind of keeping us honest on the story that Julie was just describing. So you can see that nice uplift, especially since April, and that's directly related to the optimization work to improve the interactions on the first layer that she was describing. And then we'll expect to see, as we go and release the yield on consent work later this week, we'll see that will make a major kind of positive impact for our customers. So we're excited to have that going out soon. Just wanted to share a couple just reminders again about INP optimization. So, you know, as we've kind of mentioned a couple times throughout this presentation, your CMP is one of many often third-party technologies present on your site. So as we've been working with customers to define how we're going to improve, we have seen the challenges they're facing, often balancing changes within the CMP, other technology, and of course their own website. And then also, of course, with the CMP, there's that split of impact that we can control and impact outside of us that we're going to talk about a little bit more later. So for example, there are elements like, for example, a custom UI or the number of vendors that will impact the CMP performance that are outside of our control, but we have incorporated some of those into our best practice guides for you to be able to continue to optimize your INP scores. And then another thing that, as you're going through this process, to keep in mind, when we think of overall website performance, there are potential trade-offs too that you are going to have to make decisions on. So for example, a kind of top banner style may improve your page load speed, but may reduce your consent rate. So that's one of the findings in, we put out a consent rate benchmark report earlier this year that you can access on our website. So again, there are all kind of different pieces of trying to pinpoint how to make your improvements. And like Julie said, we definitely consider this critical work and will continue to prioritize in 2024. Like I said, we have some best practice and guidance based on what we've seen work with other customers, and Hernan is going to dive into a little bit more in the next section. And then just a final reminder that you know, every CMP in the world is going to have an impact on your web performance, but we are aiming to lead the pack in that regard. So with that, I will hand the mic over to Hernan to walk us through some best practices in troubleshooting.
Thank you, Desirée. So here are some best practices you can apply to try to improve the performance, not only on INP, but in other metrics in general. First thing that was mentioned is activate the yield on consent performance flag, which will be released soon to everyone. And we'll do a quick demo right after this to show you why yielding on the consent action it's important and how that improves the INP scores of many websites. But there's other things you can do as well, like limit the amount of vendors and purposes that you put on the notice. Sometimes for notices that are IAB related, it's easy to enable all IAB vendors because it's easier to set up. But that means there's more vendors to process on their website, and there's more processing time when you agree, when you disagree, and when we load the notice and calculate all of the different things that are required for the website. Avoiding adding third-party scripts right away on the website if they're not really necessary. So Didomi is one of the first things that's probably going to be loading on the website because you need the consent of your users. There might be things that can wait a bit to load in the website, and that's not going to start fighting for that main thread that the browsers only have. So try to load as minimal as possible and what's required, and try to load the things that are required at the right time. Avoid custom UI implementations. We try to put all of the best practices in place in terms of yielding and making sure that the performance is great. But when there's a custom UI implementation, we lose control over what's running on your notice. Whenever there's for example, a click on the agree button on your notice, under the hood, we are doing a lot of things to make sure that executes performantly. If you have a custom button that's running your actions, you also need to make sure that action is properly processed for performance. So yielding at the right points, making sure that there's no unnecessary things running. So custom UIs might be a introduction of performance pains if they're not properly implemented. And finally, but not least, and this is related to the GLO consent, and we're going to see that on the demo, is try to make sure that all of the callbacks and things that are running in your website, this is not specifically to CMP actions itself. In this case, I'm highlighting some specific CMP actions, but it's in general, try to make sure that they don't block the main thread too much. So if you have TCF API callbacks, tag managers, integrations calls, actions that you're running on constant change and notice hidden, make sure that those actions are not going to take a lot of the main thread time, because that's going to impact your INP. And the same thing applies to other things that you're running on your website. If you aim to have a smaller task along your website, your INP is going to be good. That's like a good recipe. So with that said, let's dive into a quick live demo and show you what the GLO consent is doing and why it's doing some wonders on INP. So I have here two websites, Demo 1 and Demo 2. They are absolutely the same website as a donuts store. They're absolutely the same website. They have the same code. The only difference is that Demo 1 has a notice and Demo 2 has another Didomi notice with the yield on consent true. And I'm sharing a little bit the code here. It doesn't really matter, but the point I'm trying to here is that we have this script tag here that is appending some action on consent change. So whenever we trigger a consent change event, we're going to be running this task. This one is a little bit of a fake task that tries to simulate something that might happen on your website. That is just running some specific demanding task. It's creating an array of 25,000 items and then adding random numbers to it and sorting it. So it takes a little bit of time to process that. And we're treating that after the consent change. And this piece of code is also on both websites. And I'm measuring the INP and all of the Web Vitals metrics here using an extension called Web Vitals extension. This is handy for examples like this when you want to debug quickly and you don't want to use the Web Vitals library, though I would recommend on your website you use the Web Vitals library. But for small examples like this, it gives you on the developer tools the right values for all of your metrics. So let me reset my consent here and then refresh the first page. And here to simulate a smaller website, because I'm running this demo on my Mac is really fast. So even though there might be not the best implementation, it's going to run fast in general. So I'm here setting up a 20 times slower CPU. So we can sort of simulate a slower device that would most likely match a standard phone or a not so good phone. All right, so we loaded the website and we have the notice, and let's interact with the notice and see what we get. So if I click on agree, that's going to give us INP, and you can see actually INP is really good. So what's the point of the demo, right? And that's because of some of the improvements that we did in the past, and we'll see the details on why this is running really well. But now let's do the same thing. Let's refresh the page, reset our consent. We get our banner again. And now let's do 2 clicks. So I agree, and instantly after I do another click. And now we see it went from 40 to 45.56. Probably if we run it a few times, it might differ for better or for worse, most likely for worse. Let's see, here is INP is 560, so it's not good. So why a second click right after the first click could trigger a wrong INP? Let's do a performance analysis on the website, and let's get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening. So we're going to do a performance analysis, reset the consent, the page is going to load, and the browser is sort of tracking and measuring everything that's going on. So I'm going to do a click, and click right after the ad setting. And let's see what the performance tab is going to yield. So here we have the interaction of everything that went into the website. And if I focus here we have the website, and then we click agree around this time here. Let's zoom out. And we can see, I'm going to try to expand here so you can see better. Here on top, where we have the timings, we can see there was a pointer action. And this is the first click when I first click on agree. And you can see the action, it was pretty fast. The pointer was processed by Chrome really fast. And the reason for that is because we added a yielding. So on the action to process the notice vendors and everything that needs to be done to agree to the notice, we added a small yielding on the click. So when you click on the button, we yield. And if you only do one click, that's really fast. After that, we start running everything that's processing between the set user agree to all. And you can see at this point here, we register the second click. And after the second click, Chrome is starting to complain about the INP. And the truth is we are blocking the main thread throughout this whole interaction from the click until the main thread was available here when we finish the set user agree to all task. And so this is where the yielding on consent starts making sense, because when we dig into that, if you see that all of the actions run by Didomi are on a light green, and then on a more yellow green, here is the action that we run on consent change. This is the code that I showed that was running on consent change. It's taking 481 milliseconds, so that's sort of delay. So let's take a look at the second website, which is implementing the flag, and we can already see here that the INP, the interaction is good. So let me reset here, and let's do another performance tracking here and see what's the difference and how's that impacting INP. So I'm going to do the same thing, 2 clicks, and we're going to mesh. We're going to get the profile. And then we're going to try to find the place where we click on agree. It's around here. So right here already, we can see that the set user agree to all, it's a little bit smaller than the other one before. And there are anonymous function is running here. And this is code that's not set by Didomi. This is code that I put on the website to react with the consent change. So here what we did is we actually started yielding at the point of processing consent change events. So we make sure everything on the set user agree to all runs and runs fast. And then whatever needs to be processed, integrations, tag managers, consent change event, notice hidden, is processed in smaller chunks. And that makes the interaction faster, because now the delay from the pointer to the moment the main thread was free it's smaller, thus improving the INP performance. So you want to apply this pattern not only here on the CMP, but on your website in general. If you're having an action that's taking too much time and the user is going to be interacting throughout the time, you want to make sure that action is broken down in smaller chunks. So that whenever there's an interaction, the main thread is free up for the keep space for the browser to do cleanups, re-render, and things like that. So let me get back into the slides. Maybe someone can, yeah, thank you. Here it's another example of a real website of a client that's running some TCF API actions and some tag manager code, and everything is running on the set user agree to all. This is before yield on consent, it's on. After yield on consent is on, the agreed. Actually, I put the wrong image, but you can see is that it would move at the end of the queue. And finally, related to the items about vendors and ensuring you have the right vendors on your screen. Probably processing vendors, if you have DCF, takes time because we have to go through all of them, process the vendors and the purposes, encode it, put it into the cookies, saving it, passing down to the DCF API. So the amount of vendors you have might impact the performance of your notice. Here is the difference between a notice with one DCF vendor, a notice with 11 DCF vendors, and a notice with all of the DCF vendors enabled with 841 vendors in general. It takes a little bit more time because it's going through all of those 800 vendors. So if you make sure your notice has the specific vendors that are applicable to your website, that's definitely going to improve the performance of your website and of the CMP.
All right, thank you very much, Hernan. Thank you, everyone, for the presentation. A quick note on the polls before we go to the Q&A session. So we had two polls running during the presentation. The first one was on how familiar are people with Google Core Web Vitals, and we have about 45% of the audience that seems to be very familiar with them, whereas roughly 55% of the audience is not familiar to somewhat familiar, which is interesting because it has been a very urgent, to some extent, question for a lot of our clients in the last few months, and it does show that there is still room to discover more things about Core Web Vitals. And the other poll that I thought was particularly interesting was how high of a priority is improving your INP scores in the next quarter, and around 60% of the respondents said that it's a very high priority, which lines up pretty well with what we've seen internally in terms of clients reaching out to us with questions and opinions on how to improve their INP score. So thanks a lot for participating there. And if we turn our attention to questions, I will maybe select, we'll try to answer all of them, but I'll kind of like decide on the order and redirect them somewhat naturally through the panel. So maybe Hernan, as a transition, I think on what you presented last, there's quite a few questions around the impact of some of the choices you presented. And also optimizations possible. So maybe the first interesting question there is whether limiting the number of vendors has an impact on advertising revenue or revenue sources. I don't know, Hernan, if you want to cover this one. If not, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I mean, we can answer together. I think the point I was trying to stress is that is to avoid adding vendors that you're not really using. So you want to get consent for the vendors that you're going to be using on your website. If you add vendors that are not going to be using, then getting consent from the user on that vendor has really no impact either on ads or anything on your website. It's just making us processing another vendor. So if you can make sure to target specific vendors that you're using on your website and that you need to collect consent from, that's the sweet spot.
Yeah, so there is value in making sure you don't have vendors in your notice that you don't work with, so that drive no revenue to you. And that's particularly important for TCF because obviously you have a lot of IBTCF vendors, and there is this option of enabling all IBTCF vendors that a lot of publishers still use, which isn't a bad thing in and of itself, but will give you hundreds of vendors on your website. With a lot of them, you don't really work with or don't know about that well. And that will drive a poor INP score. And the other point that I think goes in that direction of trying to limit the number of vendors on your website is both from a regulation and from a TCF perspective, there is encouragement to be a bit more specific in the vendors that you have in your notice. And while there isn't an exact number of what's a good number of vendors, I think below 100, up to 30 to 50 is a good target. If you can get there, that's a good amount. And in terms of revenue impact, what we've done quite a few times with clients in the past was attribution studies, where you try to understand what's the revenue drive of every individual vendor, so that you can then decide which ones you're keeping versus which ones you might not be collecting consent for anymore, based on how much revenue they are actually driving. So I think the main two things is, first, make sure the vendors you have in your notice are vendors you actually work with. And second, try to do attribution studies to understand out of all those vendors, and particularly so advertising vendors you work with, which ones are really driving revenue versus which ones aren't, and you can potentially drop on your website. So obviously, we're not saying there is no advertising revenue impact. There probably is, depending on what vendors you're dropping. But it's the same idea of arbitraging between user experience performance and your advertising revenue on the other side, and trying to be a bit cognizant of the choice you're making there. I think that's what we're trying to share there, with obviously no one-size-fits-all answer. And then Hernan, I think there was another one that I thought was interesting that was about the question of mobile versus desktop. And somebody noticed that the improvements seem to be higher on mobile when you do yielding on consent, things like that. Can you maybe explain a bit more about why that is and why it can vary per platform?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And the reason why the improvements are more obvious on mobile is that usually mobile are running on some phones browser. We have less processor and less capability to process tasks. And so those interactions tend to take more time. Whereas if you have, let's say, you're blocking the main thread with some task that's doing like a complex thing and it's taking a lot of time, it's most likely going to be processed faster on your computer than it's going to be on your phone. And that less processing time on your phone is going to block the main thread more, and thus generate the worse INP. So by adding these yieldings and making sure to break down those tasks, the improvements are going to be more obvious in mobile, because in mobile is where the processors take more time to process those long tasks.
Yeah, and when you look at the metrics on the Google technology reports, you see pretty clearly that the desktop scores are generally pretty good, whereas the mobile scores are the ones that get improved and impacted a lot. So it's not so much that the changes apply to mobile more than to desktop. It's just that desktops being much more powerful, they need a lot less improvements than mobile does.
Okay.
Another one that I think could be interesting for you to answer, Hernan, was on, so somebody mentions that they have been using yield on init option that I think we have applied now to everybody, so it's not really an option anymore, and that they noticed the notable improvements there, but that they haven't really seen much gain from yield on consent. So I think there are two interesting things there. The first one is, why do they see different improvements based on different changes we make? And second, whether we have more optimizations planned.
Yeah, so yield on init was one of our first experimentation, and it was more related to TBT. How setting up the Didomi notice was kind of blocking the main thread while your website was loading. So we applied a very similar pattern with yielding on different parts, and we free up the main thread, and that gave considerably very positive results, and we ended up actually implemented that as a feature. And then yield on consent, it really depends on the implementation of the CMP. If you have TCF API callbacks, if you have consent change callback, if you have tag managers running things on reacting to vendors, the more things you have on the consent action, the more that consent action is going to be delayed, and the worse the INP might be scored. If you don't have any callback, chances are you already have a good INP value, and you're not really going to see that much of a positive change on this particular flag.
So one note that I will add there is on whether we have more improvements planned. Obviously we do. There are a lot of things we would like to do, but we definitely need help in prioritizing those, and that's because it is hard for us as a CMP to evaluate the impact of our changes on your websites, right? We don't know your websites as well as you do. And so what we test and what we optimize in the lab on test pages isn't going to translate automatically in actual gains for real websites out there. And so what's always helpful to us once we've released a new flag and you've tested it is to reach out back to us, talk to our support team. And then there are two things we look at together. The first one is your INP score, how much of it is impacted by the CMP? Sometimes we have clients reaching out to us and, our conclusion is the CMP doesn't have a big impact on the score. So any gains you might want to make there will be on your code. Like there isn't much we can do. So that's the first thing we'll look at together is trying to determine whether it's actually the CMP impacting your score. And then second, if it is, then Hernan and the team look at it on our side to try to understand what other parts of the CMP are impacting your code. Are impacting your INP score. That's how we found the yield on consent, for instance, recently after we improved the yield on init. So by all means, reach out to our support team with example websites where you think the INP score should be better. And the team is happy to take a look at that and prioritize optimizations on our side based on actual websites that you think should do better, basically. So feedback and examples there are always always good. And it's always a bit hard for us to get that feedback without testing things and adding flags and things like that.
And Jawad, maybe I want more comment on the yield on consent and the results. If you're using a custom UI implementation and you have basically a different flow from our standard notice, you might not see the benefits of the flag because the flag is being applied into our code, into our actions. There might be, if you're calling our APIs to set a user ID to all, it's actually being applied there, but there's chances that it might not be going through your custom implementation of the UI.
There were a group of questions on benchmarks. So Desirée has shared on the chat the link to the Core Web Vitals technology report that is completed by Google, I think, on a monthly basis. And that basically has those types of benchmarks. So you'll see Didomi for the different core vitals. You'll see us throughout time on different platforms, things like that. So that's definitely a good asset to look at as on the benchmark question. And obviously, looking at your own metrics and your own data on your own websites is equally important, right? You do want to compare yourself to the benchmark, but you also want to make sure you're optimizing and working on the right targets, and your targets might not be the same as what the benchmark is looking at. Also keep in mind when you look at those benchmarks that they are not a measure of Didomi exclusively, because they don't measure Didomi in a lab setting without anything else. They measure roughly the average core web vitals of the websites with Didomi on them. And so part of the improvements come from us, part of the improvements come from you and the website we run on, but it's not a measure of Didomi as an abstract concept or in an abstract environment. It's a measure of the websites with Didomi on it. And on that topic of measuring, there was another question on where can we see the CMP ready time. So we publish that on the websites themselves. When you have the Didomi CMP, the web SDK installed, we push what's called a performance mark through the performance API. And so those marks, or they're also called user timings, are captured by your performance tool. Generally, most of them do that, and then they will report that to you. They will report, so we publish two marks. One is what we call the Didomi init started. It means Didomi is on the page and has started working. And then the Didomi init finished, I think, which is we're done, we're ready. And so the ready time, or the time we take to be ready, is the difference between the end and the start. I think it's documented on our documentation, so feel free to reach out to the support team and they'll be happy to share that with you. And that's things you can get through your performance tools on actual users and get actual data around it. So that's always interesting. Similarly, the CMP ready time isn't an abstract measure. It's the measure of the time we take on your website. So if your website has blocking operations in between the Didomi initialization, the time could be longer, not because of Didomi, but because of other tasks on the page. So always keep that in mind generally, that when you're looking at TBT or INP, they're impacted obviously by the CMP, but also by everything else you're doing on the website. And then there is an interesting question on whether the different improvements we've seen on INP or on TBT, so whether generally core web vitals improvements have any impact on business metrics. That's something that I think is an interesting question that we can answer maybe more in a general way. I don't know if Thierno, you have any. I know that's something Google looks at and pushes for. So I don't know if you have anything you want to share there in a generic way.
Not in a generic way. We have just a collection of like case studies where we have worked with like a lot of partners, and when they try to improve INP, we saw like a strong correlation between like this metric and business impact. Usually like bounce rate, you know, ads the CTR, or even page views. So these kind of things can actually be seen like when you try to improve INP. So, but it's not like something written in stone, you know. Every single business need to find actually like which metric that INP could actually help.
Yeah, and so web.dev I think is where a lot of this is published. You can see the case studies, and I think it's always a good source for anything core vitals related. And particularly so around understanding why those web vitals are there. So why did Google pick those specific ones, and how they generally impact some of the key business metrics that you're looking at. I don't think, to be transparent, I don't think we have a lot of data on our side on that. Julie, if you have anything there, feel free to share. But as far as I know, we generally don't have a lot of that in terms of how INP would impact advertising revenue, for instance, for a publisher.
No, I have nothing specific to add.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I've noticed there was also a few questions that I think touched back on what Julie presented, which was what core web vitals did every improvement impact. So that's what we try to represent here. You can see for every one of those changes, we try to link them to what core web vitals would be impacted. And you can see a pretty clear trend that INP became a focus starting last summer, whereas before that, it was more for TBT focus. And TBT here can also be seen as a proxy for LCP. In that context, when we improve TBT, we improve LCP. So that's how you want to look at that, basically. And so I think the three big changes we made there were the differential serving and some size and package optimization. That was LCP and TBT optimizations. And then the yield on init and the yield on consent were for INP. Generally, yielding is for INP. It's a bit of a shortcut, but you can generally look at it this way: is we're yielding to improve the UI responsiveness. So INP today, FID before, things like that. But generally, yielding is for that. I think we're almost at the end of the question. There was one that I thought was also interesting that was answered in writing, but I think is interesting enough that we do want to highlight it a bit, which was, can the CMP impact INP negatively beyond the interactions on the consent notice? And so generally, the notice itself, so the first layer is the biggest offender in a CMP, because that's what 99% of your users will see and interact with. But any UI displayed by the CMP can impact INP. Generally, any UI element and any UI interaction can impact INP. So layers 2 and 3, the purposes, the vendors, can also impact INP. And we've applied generally the same changes to those layers that we have to the first one, which is yielding when necessary and things like that. So INP, because it's interaction and user interaction driven, it's all about the UI. When there's no UI, there's generally no INP impact. So that's the main item you want to keep in mind there. And then beyond that, a CMP can impact other metrics on pages where there is no UI as well. So LCP can be impacted just because the CMP is there and he's computing things or pushing out callbacks and things like that. So he's using the main thread basically. So INP itself is generally when there is a user UI displayed, whereas other core web vitals can be impacted on pages when there is no UI displayed as well. All right, I think and I hope that we've answered all the questions that I saw in the list. If you have any further question, feedback, if you've tested yielding on consent, or if you do want to test yielding on consent, feel free to reach out to our support team. And then we're more than happy to spend time with you understanding what your specific INP score is and how we can help you improve it. And we'll continue doing that in the months to come. And we will be releasing the yield on consent flag generally at some point as well. So we introduce those flags as in a beta phase initially because we do want to make sure they work well and they're not breaking anything. But then the plan is always to expand that automatically to every website as well. So thanks a lot, everybody, for joining. Thanks a lot to the panel and Thierno for presenting as well today. And we will be sharing the recording and the slides with all the registrants. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.